Good afternoon. Packed house. You can come forward a little bit if you want to. A bit hard to see down the back. So we've actually got a really interesting panel and some really interesting panelists. So you guys are going to be the beneficiaries of that. I'm just going to set it up very quickly. And it sort of reflects what Mark just said. So we live in a streaming world, and in a streaming world, metadata is sort of king, if you like. The sheer volume of data is pretty, it's huge. It's a tsunami of data, and literally billions of transactions a day. And what I want to talk about, and I'm sure what we all want to talk about, is how we make that data pay. You know, metadata is about getting paid, and I personally, as someone who's been in the industry for a long time, I personally think that an artist or a songwriter should get paid for every single use of their song in every country, on every platform, and that's not really happening at the moment, I think it's fair to say. So that's our aspiration, and we are going to talk about some of the issues and some of the solutions, but we're also going to dig hopefully quite deep into some of the local issues, Asian-specific issues, and how that adds another dimension of complexity to what is already a complex thing. So I'm just going to start, actually, if you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, what you do, where you come from, and then we can kick off. Start down the other end with Sami.
Hello, my name is Sami Valkonen. I'm currently at PRS heading the international department. I've been there for a little over a year. Before that, I had 8 years at Google/YouTube, first 5 years at Google Play, and then at YouTube. I've only been in the music industry for about 35 years. So there's all kinds of stuff that's happened in the interim, some of which I'm very proud of, others that I'm not.
Hello, this is Caroline Chow. I am a label owner, Wow Music. We are a label with 12 years of experience, and I joined the label 2.5 years ago. Before that, I headed up EMI Music for 12 years, doing in the digital space. So now I'm wearing the hat of content creators administrator.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jacqui Louez Schoorl with the unpronounceable surname, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Jigsaw. I've been working on this for almost 7 years, and we are building, if you will, the world's largest official database of music credits. So everything from who played bass to drums, who was a backing vocalist, to who mastered the album.
Hi, this is Kenney from BMG Hong Kong. I joined BMG this January 2019 to open the second office in Asia for BMG. And before BMG, I spent my last 3 years with Cobalt and also another 10 years with Peer Music. And I started my career as a CPA, so I'm very sensitive on data, on numbers. And the good thing about my joining of BMG is that, it's the 10th year of BMG. So you may have heard about BMG in the 80s, 90s, but our bosses just closed the old BMG and opened a new BMG just to tackle the digital development. So I'm happy to share my experience on personal or even in BMG, how we tackle the data thing with you guys. Yeah.
Thank you all. So I'm going to start this fairly high level, and actually I'm just going to pick up on what you just said, Kenney. So digital has completely changed the business from the old BMG to the new BMG and for everybody else. So I know that's a sort of obvious thing to say, but you had some thoughts on that, about how that's sort of manifesting itself.
Yeah, embarrassingly, I'm actually a rock star. I released an album in 2020. Yes, year 2000. When I quit my work at rock music at that moment, the Taiwan label, me and my band released 2 albums. And I was not a trained producer or engineer, but even dating back to year 2000, I can use computer to do the mixing and recording. And I still remember I using Cakewalk 9 at the moment. It's a very, very low-level program, but without any training, I can just play around, do the recording, try and error, do the mixing and so-called mastering myself. And then we released 2 albums. And luckily or unluckily for the music industry, we were the second runner-up of the best band in that year. So, someone like me without any training, dating back to year 2000, can make use of technology to release the songs and get some achievement. And the thing about technology is that everybody, if you got I'm not saying that I got the talent, but if you get the passion to do something, you can actually try to create and upload the music to get your music produced and promoted fairly easily compared to the traditional business world. But the problem is, it's very easy for the creator to create, to upload, to promote their music. But for most of the cases, the creator, they don't know much about the back end. They don't know much about the data, the registration. So in the early stage of the digital music development, I think I see, at one stage, we see lots of music upload, or even the label, when they upload the music, the data was not comprehensive enough. And it creates some problem hurdle on the back end of the administration. Yeah.
Sami, seeing as you're a veteran, or the veteran on this on this stage.
I also released an album, but that was in 1982, so there wasn't a lot of digital stuff going on back then.
But how have you seen, in that time, have you seen the business change?
Well, obviously what you said about digital changing everything, that's yes. I actually think that there's two issues that need to be addressed. One is quality of the data, and the other one is quantity of the data. And both of them are real issues. We said we wouldn't talk about solutions yet at this early stage, but for the quality, it's really important that there is one authoritative database. And as PRS, we made a big investment in ICE, as many of you know. And the whole concept there is that is the place where all of the data that relates to PRS members is correctly recorded. Now, that's going to have some implications. What used to be pan-European licensing for digital is fast evolving into global licensing. Because obviously, once we've made that investment in having the data correctly at ICE, we want to use that database for everything. It's better for us, it's better for the DSPs, because then they can have the claims come from one place, and it's more efficient for them. So that's definitely the direction of traffic. Now, as it relates to the quantity, 5 years ago, we processed only 136 billion transactions. Last year, we did 1.2 trillion. So that's the kind of volume we're talking. That's a tenfold increase in 5 years. And it's not like from 10 to 100. It's like from hundreds of billions to trillions. So for something like this, you need to have industrial scale. And that's the other reason why I believe that there needs to be these processing hubs. Not everybody should be investing in the technology that has the ability to do this type of processing. It needs more than one. I'm not saying I should take over the world by any means, but not every company can possibly have their own databases and processing facilities.
Okay. Thank you, Sami. So I'm just going to wind it back a little bit, and just come back to and use your statement, Kenney, to kick off. So, how, on a practical level, how has that ability for anybody to create anything, anywhere, and distribute anywhere, how is that manifesting itself in your day-to-day life in data issues, practical data issues? And this is for you, Caroline, as well.
We're dealing with a lot of composer artists and indie artists, and all they would like to do is to have their content uploaded or created so that they can monetize them. So when we communicate with them, we think that there are issues that they face. For example, they don't know there are so many fields, data fields, they need to complete when they produce the track or the audio. And there are, like, if you have 10 music streaming platforms, there are 10 different sets of data standards. So as a content creator, they have no idea where and to start. So I think the issue is they don't know where to go. So they would need support and help from companies that can help them to get those data in place accurately.
And how did that come about? How do you end up with 10 different data standards on 10 different platforms?
Because all the music platforms, they have different requirements. There is no unified standard across all the music platforms. So that's why they need, when we upload a track, we need to upload 10 times and in different formats.
Yeah, and they're clearly not talking to each other as well.
No,
yeah.
They're sort of like in different systems.
Yeah. And Sami, do you see that in the European market as well? Different standards for different platforms?
Well, I think we've come a long way in terms of getting into a few standards. I don't think we're all the way there yet. But I think it's inevitable that, there's going to be conversion. There's efficiencies for everyone from going to that. Obviously, there are the natural political battles as to should it be mine thing or should it be your thing? And, these are the things that, by the way, contributed significantly to the failure of the GRD projects some years ago. But it's going in the right direction, and I would hope that within the next decade we would get to a small set of standards that the industry uses.
And Jacqui, I wanted to ask you this because we're talking about independent creators, doing their own thing and having to go through that process. So you obviously see that as well. It's part of your business model. Can you shine a bit of a light on that from your perspective?
Yeah, one of the things that matters to us as a company and to me personally, I started in film, and the only way that I got my next gig was through my credit. So when I transitioned to producing music videos and then going to work at EMI, was how important the music credits were. And with digital music, aside from the artist and the songwriters and the producers, it's like everybody else that worked on the project just kind of evaporated. Whether they were the mastering engineer or the bassist, the drummer, the guitarist, backing vocalist. So what we do is we get the data from who we believe are the custodians of the data. So from the labels, from publishers, from different industry associations. They own the data. We don't own the data. It's theirs. They can withdraw it from our platform at any time that they want to. But we pull it together, deduplicate it, map it, and deep link it. And then what that does is it creates an official encyclopedia, if you will, of who played what on the track. So if you want to be able to see who was the drummer, because you might want to hire them, or the mastering engineer, you have the ability to do so.
Right. And so there's a couple of points that come out of that. One is, and we'll talk about whether metadata is strictly as we see it, right, which is just the sort of fields that we fill in to give to a digital platform. I know you've got a view on that, Kenney. But before we get into that, one of you made the comment that, when you're dealing with creators, they're not necessarily thinking about the admin side, naturally. And so that becomes a sort of a blockage, becomes a pain point.
And I think there's a long tail to that because particularly if you look at the UK, Australia and the US, if you think back to the recording process 20 years ago, there was an assistant engineer in the room who was capturing what every single person was doing on that recording. And now you can do it in your room. I mean, Flume has written a song flying from LA to New York before. So, it's such a mobile industry industry and there's no limit to what can be done. The thing is, though, somebody can work on a song and it could sit in their repertoire for 2 years before it gets released and cut and released to market. There's a very long tail to that data. And, you know, good luck remembering 2 years ago, hang on, who did play drums on that track? Who was recording keys? So it's really important to capture the data at the moment of its inception. And we call it metadata, but I think a really easy layman's terms example of part of the process is the credits. Credits are metadata, and then we add a lot of other things to the metadata.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there's obviously two different things. There's the data that is needed for the payment, which is super critical because you don't get paid otherwise. And then there's the data for the credits. Now, as it relates to the data to get paid, we've been working with Björn Ulvaeus from ABBA. He has a venture called Sessions, and we've been working with him on that. And the idea there is that we would capture the songwriting information at the sessions. It's called Sessions, by the way. Now, there's a little bit of a problem with that we've noticed, which is you have a band in the studio, you know, somebody comes and does a little rap on it, there's a good vibe, everybody's feeling good. Nobody wants to discuss the splits. Nobody wants to spoil the party and say, am I going to get 20% songwriting credit for the thing that I just did? So therefore, it doesn't get done. And then it becomes this thing where nobody wants to touch it because it's an unpleasant thing where you have to actually agree on the percentages between the collaborators. So, you know, sometimes it's not technology, it's just human issues that get in the way.
And so that sort of neatly brings us to, I guess we start to get to the crux of at least one of the problems, which is that you have people in the studio doing their thing. You're capturing some of that. You're certainly capturing the label side of the data. But as Sami says, if the songwriters haven't agreed or can't agree or don't want to talk about the splits at that particular time, and the label is really keen to get that record out tomorrow, it goes out, gets on the platform, and it goes up without any songwriter data. So then you end up with this issue of we're catching up. So the songwriter data comes a bit later. And we end up at the sort of intersection point where those two bits of data are not necessarily connected. And as you say, Jacqui, it could be 2 years later. And, you know, there's got to be a process for, you know, putting those two bits of data together for matching them. So have you guys got any thoughts about that? Generally or specifically?
And also maybe there are like some content creators, they don't have proper planning when they create the content. Right. For example, they don't even know how many fields or data fields they need to complete. So when they create a song, they want to create a song and then upload it. So there are a lot of data that they have not been think of that they are required. And also when they want to create a song, they haven't think of where they're going to release it. So if the song is in English, then of course it can be serviced like in English-speaking countries. What if its service is created in China, that the language is in Chinese, then how are we going to feed on platform that only support one language? So these are the issues that without proper planning, then the content creators, they have not even thought about that. Yeah.
So we're going to get into the jigsaw puzzle in a little bit. But so in your experience, and this is really for everybody because you see it at different points in the, or different places in the ecosystem, how do you see in day-to-day life that problem being fixed or trying to be fixed? I mean, Sammy's in a PRO, you're in a, Kenney, you're in a publisher/label, Caroline, you're at the coalface in labels, Jacqui, you're in a data company effectively. So you're seeing it from different angles. How are you seeing that currently being fixed? Is it just manual, or are we seeing some other processes?
Before answering the question, I want to give an opinion first that while we are talking about data, talking about the digital issues that developed, actually most of the problem are not new to us.
Right.
Since the traditional day, we had counterclaim, we have writer changing the publishing contract, and we have the claim issues. It's all the same. Yeah. It's no different. So when talking about how to improve that, we need to also know how traditionally the issue was handled. And also we need to know about some local practice issue. Like when you mentioned about the studio writing credit thing, I can tell you in Asia it worked totally different. Most of the songs were not created in the studio. It's like a factory. The composer gives a song to the record label or producer. The label or the producer like it, they pass it to the lyrics writer to write the lyrics, and then they release the song. And then the publisher and the label will discuss the credit. So even you can find the best solution in the Western world to develop the data from source, from the studio. But that system may not be 100% applicable in Asia. And from my experience, I work with some tech-savvy company, and they declare they have the perfect system in the world to tackle the music industry issues. But I can say that in Asia, they may not be able to implement the system here to resolve the same issue. And I want to finally reiterate that no matter how technically we can resolve the problem, finally we cannot forget the human issue, about the human input in resolving all this industry issue. Yeah.
Look, I think they're great points. I want to sort of push back a little bit because I want to pick up on Sammy's quantity point. So yeah, we have the same issues that we were dealing with in the 90s, just in a different way. But now the volume of those issues is, what was it, Sami? 10 times?
1.2 trillion last year just for PRS. Yeah. Just for PRS.
So I agree. You know, there's always a human element in these things, but just the sheer volume makes me worry about us being able to, capture the right information. So ultimately, the songwriters and the artists are getting paid.
So it really shouldn't be a hugely complicated issue, because all it is, it's matching a sound recording, and sound recordings have codes, they're called ISRCs, to a musical composition, which also has codes called ISWCs. So if you have an ISRC, ISWC match in your database, then you have successfully linked the song to the sound recording, and everything should flow smoothly. Unfortunately, both the ISRC database and the ISWC databases are a bloody mess. And the same recording gets assigned multiple ISRCs, and the same song, multiple ISWCs. Sometimes people issue them without the proper authority to do so, and then they clog up the system because obviously those are not even valid codes, but somehow they get into the system. So there's a hygiene factor here, which is that if people would actually do their work diligently and follow the rules, a lot of this would get cleaned up, at least over time. But the problem is that there are people there who are sloppy, there are people there who want to cut corners, there are people there who are even deliberately fraudulent, and those mistakes that they make, they unfortunately then permeate the system and screw it up for the rest of us.
Anybody want to pick up on that?
Well, I think sometimes when the DSPs, like the partners who work with the content source, they wanted to surface the contents up, but the people who actually in the digital operations, they have no idea who owns the data. So sometimes when they deal with the content ingestion, when there is conflicts, they don't know how to handle, so they do not deliberately want to mess it up. But sometimes if the volume is so big and when you try to ingest the content, it's not always smooth. So it will create conflict issues. And you are not always working with the owner of the label. If I'm a one-man person owning the label, that's fine. You always come to me. But sometimes you're dealing with the colleagues in the digital operations. They have no idea about label copy. They just process the metadata. So there is problem and issues to manipulate the data. So when you manipulate it, there's always error. So I think this goes on and on. That's why there will be like conflict claims.
And Jacqui, you deal with data. What's the picture that you see?
Well, yeah. So we launched 13 weeks ago, and we're still in beta. So there's still a lot that we have to fix. But with our data partners, we've got who I consider, the four majors: so Sony, Universal, Warner, Merlin, in plethora of independent labels. We have some industry associations, and through that, we now have 100 million individual credits in the database. And deduplication's a big thing. We had one Australian megastar, and we had 17 different versions of his name that came through from our official data partners. So deduplicating that was fun, but we got there, and it's an ongoing process for us daily. But there's a human element, you see, because you got people entering that data somewhere along the line. And, I've got a cracker of a surname. So I can tell you, people get my name wrong all the time. And if my name was in a musical database, it'd be challenging. It'd be hyphenated. It'd be Louis instead of Louis. So I can see how it happens. But at the end of the day, and I know people are talking about AI with music, but it is humans that make music, because it's what speaks to our hearts and our souls. So it is incumbent upon us to get it right at the very beginning. As Sami said with the ISRCs, when I worked at EMI, we had instances where we had an ISRC for an album and found out that it actually already existed for a whole other album in the UK. Right. And then there was another album completely unrelated in the States. And then we
all with the same ISRC.
Yeah.
Right.
So then we had to reissue ours. Now, this was back when you had physical product. That was not a fun exercise. It was an expensive mistake. And, it just happened that we had someone brilliant that was diligent in our team that actually discovered the issues with the other two ISRCs. So Sammy's right. I mean, and Caroline and Kenney, it is incumbent upon us to do our due diligence and make sure we're getting it correct the whole way through. But as you say,
and as Sami has said, those mistakes, whether they're mistakes, deliberate, fraudulent, because we see the whole spectrum, multiplied by millions and billions, you end up with a really significant problem. So I want to move on to Asia. I want to talk about Asia because we talk about and we've sort of talked about these problems at a reasonably high level. But when we get into Asia, some of those problems get amplified even further, right? You've got another dimension of complexity around language, around character sets in different markets, and so on. So maybe, Caroline, you mentioned before, you were talking about the segmentation of the market. Maybe you just want to describe what you meant about the different segments.
When we talk to the content creators, we would ask them a question. Which market would you like to launch first? Because there are like multiple digital music platforms you can work with. You should think of which is your core market. If, for example, Greater China is your major market, then you should focus on those digital players then look up their metadata requirements. Then, for example, some digital platform, they only support one language. If your song is in Mandarin, then would you put out a song name in English or Mandarin? some clever K-pop artists, they would put the song name in English so that they can use that name in all platforms with the same name, easy to remember, easy to plug. So when you tag that name, then you'll be easy to promote. So when you create your content, then maybe that's the area to go if you wanted to target your segment. But if your market is Indonesia, so then you need to look up all the digital players. Right now, I think mobile is still a dominant market players for Indonesia. So if I want to launch my song in Indonesia, then maybe we should look at the mobile partners and then focus on the metadata that you should work on.
So I lost count,
Yep.
roughly. I mean, it was, I don't know, there was probably half a dozen at least different types of metadata you were talking about there. So if you wanted to hit all of those markets, you're submitting your data in different formats for each different platform.
Yes.
Depending on which country, and so for China, which we talked about before, you said there was already, even just within China, there was it 10?
There were
roughly?
probably 4 to 8.
4 to 8.
Different music platforms, and each one they will have a different code, different
Right.
song code. They're not using ISRC,
Right.
And they have an ISRC and they have a digital ISRC for each song, and then each platform they have a different content ID. So the same song will have maybe a dozen IDs just for the China market.
Okay, right. My head's spinning. So, okay, so we get to the jigsaw puzzle, Kenney, finally. So we've got whatever number that was, let's call it a dozen, different types of metadata just to get into, it wasn't even all the countries, it was just a handful of them. But, of course, what happens, and this is a question for you as well, Sami, what happens when that track moves out of that country and it's released in another country? Now, streaming, that happens really easily. So, the easier examples would be, Chinese characters, simplified or traditional, being Romanized, for example, for Western markets, or being translated into Japanese or Korean for the Korean market, for the local market. So then you've got those 12 or whatever number it was multiplied by whatever other languages you're going into. And then what happens when you're in PRS, which data are you looking at? I mean, we're already up to about 36 different versions. So help me understand that.
Well, for PRS, it's not really such an issue because where we go through ICE, we get that. Otherwise, we rely on the local societies to figure it out for us, and then we audit that. But I could go back to my days at Google and YouTube, where when we launched Google Play in Japan, I just remember the whole launch. Like at Google, you don't delay launches if you don't have to. But we had to delay the Japan launch several times because the data that was coming in from the Japanese labels was just impossibly lousy. So I don't want to make a value judgment there about data in Asia, but that experience certainly would suggest that there is a pretty long way to go, which I'm sure is something that impacts you guys.
I would like to share my experience on handling the Asia registration and collection. Since the traditional days, I remember when 10 years ago, in one of my when I was at Peer Music, we handled the Jacqui Chan songs. Jacqui Chan is very big in Asia. And there's one significant case that I realized that the problem is so serious about the Asia collection is that Jacqui Chan just finished the worldwide tour. So we control Wan Bear, one of the most famous songs that he must perform. And then I expect the royalty will come back from the Western world. But finally, zero money was collected. Whereas at the moment, I also handle Cranberries Publishing, and they did one show in Hong Kong, and I collect a few thousand Hong Kong dollars for them. And that's a very significant comparison. And I realized that in a traditional day, we are already having the problem. It's about the translation. Like in Hong Kong, of course, Jacqui Chan's team will submit the song list in Cantonese, in Chinese. Maybe when they do the show in US, even they submit the playlist to US in the Chinese, I'm sure the society
don't have a clue.
Can ingest that.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I don't think Jacqui Chan's team can provide Romanized title song list to them. They don't have that ability. We don't communicate in Romanized language locally. So that's the deadlock. And the problem is happening to the digital days now, and with the K-pop, with J-pop, with the globalization, it's getting even more serious. As we mentioned in our discussion about, it's a really a practical case. I talked to my overseas office about that also, because like if my overseas office pitch a song to a K-pop group, after they release a song, we need to register. Then it comes a problem. When the South Korean artists release locally, definitely most of the cases they have the Korean title because it's Korean songs. It's good if they have the song title is in English, then it will be fine. But if the original title is in Korean, then we have the two versions of the song title, the Korean local language, and then we have the Korean romanized title. Okay, if that Korean album is released in Taiwan or Hong Kong, for most of the cases, even though we are not translating, we're not adapting the song in the local language, but the local version of the album will be translated into Chinese. So we have the third and fourth title. That is the Chinese title and the Chinese romanized title. And sometimes the Koreans are very considerate. They will do their own English translation of the original Korean title. So easily, for one K-pop song, we have 5 versions of the song title. You know, when we do the label claim in Asia and in Hong Kong, we usually get the support from our overseas office to upload the label copies to the system and do the auto matching. But usually for all these Asian titles, we need to do the manual check, because we may not have the first set of data of all these 5 version of the title, and we never know what the label will provide us. They may provide us the Chinese one, or they may provide us the Korean one. It depends on the version of the album they're releasing. So that's the complication about the Asia registration. And I also want to mention, about that, in Asia, we try to follow the Western practice as much as possible, like the CWR. And even for CWR, it's developed from the West. And I'm quite, how do I say, I don't want to use the word disappointed, but somehow the CWR is not 100% useful for Asia, because at least we cannot insert all the Chinese or local language title in CWR.
And just for people, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sami, but CWR, in case you don't know, is the digital format for submitting data to the PROs.
Yeah, it's an industry standard. It should be a very useful tool for everybody in the industry to...
Common Works registration.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And so people don't use it, or it doesn't exist?
Well, when people, correct me if I'm wrong, I was not involved in design, but I was told that in the very early stage of the development of CWR, nobody considered Asia. Right. And the Asia character is very complicated. Yeah. So even up to today, CWR is not 100% compatible to the Asian language. So that's one part of the difficulties. Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair, CWR is a constantly evolving form. So hopefully it can be made to accommodate Asia as well, because it would be, going back to the very beginning of our discussion, we should have global standards as much as possible. And I think CWR is prominent enough that it has to become that global standard.
Yeah, and I think it must, because if you read the latest IPR report, out of the top 10 selling countries in the world, 3 is now in Hong Kong. 3 is now in Asia. and it's South Korea, Japan, and China. And you see South Korea, Japan, China, we're using different language. Right. And the fourth one very likely will be India. Right. You have another set of language.
Different again. Yeah. I mean, I just want to pick up on the Jacqui example, just to put that into perspective. I don't know whether you know this, Jacqui, but at one point he held the record in Sydney, Australia, for the most number of Sydney entertainment centres. It was 12 shows. So it's not small. That problem's not small. You have a major artist, doing shows and selling stuff in a Western market and not seeing literally a cent from that, which is criminal, right? Anybody else want to pick up on that before we move on? No. Okay, good. So we've got about 5 or 10 minutes. Yep. Solutions. We've talked about problems. We could talk about problems for probably another hour, but let's see. And Sami, you've already sort of flagged or started that conversation. Jacqui and Caroline, you have some thoughts on ways of making this better on a practical level?
Yeah, we were talking before about the jigsaw puzzle. There are so many parts of the industry that collectively that we all need to work on and are working on. Things like DDEX, which is setting the standard for metadata in the industry, is a really good start. But there's also, Sami mentioned Sessions, which some of you may formerly know as Audley, and they changed their name to Sessions, which is a really important initiative. There's Studio Collect from Viva, who are working to capture metadata in the recording session. But there's a point that Sami brought up, which is really valid. Our co-founder is a songwriter, record producer, and there's nothing he dislikes more, even though he's a co-founder of Jackster, of ruining a vibe of a songwriting session by asking someone, "Hey, do you happen to know your ASCAP number or your BMI member number, or do you know your ISNI?" Doesn't. Yeah, exactly. So he makes sure that after the session's finished, he's collecting all of that information. And as a producer and a songwriter, he's making sure that he's educating his co-writers and the next generation of songwriters and producers that are coming through. So at every level of the industry, there's a responsibility for us to also educate the next generation that are coming through. As Caroline said, particularly in Asia, it's how we make music in every part of the world is different. So you have to accommodate for the market that you're in and make sure that you're educated on, okay, if I'm going to release this track in China, in this Romanized or unromanized characters, what are the 75,000 metadata fields I need for the 10 different platforms that I'm going to deliver it to? But you do need to know that. Right. And so this might sound a bit harsh, but I don't think ignorance is an option anymore. It's not an excuse. Songs live forever. Thank goodness. We're all the richer for it. So making sure that you really do know who did what and you have all of the pieces of the puzzle for that one individual piece of music is important. It has a very long tail, especially if it ends up being synced.
Yeah, absolutely. And picking up on your point, Caroline, about the 10 different, 4 to 8 different platforms and different standards, how do we fix that? Is that something, where the platforms themselves need to come together? Is that government pressure? Is it industry pressure to create a unified standard for at least that one market?
For what I understand, the Chinese government, they are trying to put together a national music database. When they release digitally, they required all the content owners to register the song digitally on that database. But since each different music platform, they use a different code, different ID. So I think there's still time for them to come to the age that when they use the same code. But as a advice to content creator, maybe if you created one song that you want to launch it in the Chinese market, maybe you really need to work with a partner who will be able to translate all those 12 different platforms metadata for you so that you can focus on content creation and then to monetize your content through a partner. Yeah.
Sami, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just go back to what I said in the very beginning, which is that we need to get to fewer disparate databases. I spent 6 years of my life on a project called the Global Repertoire Database, which was at the end a massive failure. The whole premise behind that was a very ambitious one, which was, let's create one database for the world of all of the world's music in an authoritative database that can then feed everyone in the world who needs that data. Now, thinking about that in hindsight, that was a pretty crazy idea. But then again, men have visited the moon, and that may have sounded like a crazy idea. So, well, obviously it didn't work. So what we're now, and what PRS's position on this is, we are in a hubs environment where we do need more than one, but we should not have hundreds of databases that people rely on, because the more you replicate the data, the more chances there are that there's going to be some changes that happen to it, and suddenly the same information starts diverging and it loses its value. So hopefully, I know that Asia is a specifically difficult market because of the vast cultural differences, the different alphabets, et cetera, et cetera. But hopefully there will be a way for, even in Asia, the standards to be coordinated so that you don't have these types of situations with dozens of separate fields.
Yeah, I agree. If we get one unique system, that would be a good idea. But on the other hand, I would like to mention also that having one system means having a one standard thing. But I see the issue about, well, the opportunities about digital is, and also the nature about digital is that it can be so creative in a way that we don't know what the next new business could be. And if we stick on that standard on that day, then that standard may not be, again, compatible with the next new business. You can, if you got a chance, you see how the Chinese people in mainland China make use of digital to promote music. While we know Spotify, Apple Music, we know it's very useful. If you got a chance to use QQ Music or NetEase, the local Chinese version of the DSP, you see they're playing around of the technology to sell music in a more creative way. That, I believe, even the very good Western way of handling all this may not be 100% compatible with that. So my final suggestion is also be flexible and also understand the local practice. Yeah.
I think on that note, unless Jacqui, you have anything you want to add? Perfect. Yeah, if you've got questions, sure. Okay. Mark, have you got a mic?
Let's see.
You can take one of ours. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us who you are, introduce Shiu first, and then you.
I want to ask, because I'm very independent musician at the moment, writers, and my question is about the ISRC. You mentioned just now very briefly about fraudulent organization issuing ISRC. Is there any way that we can check if we get the ISRC? Because right now, for a few songs that I did, I got that when I uploaded through CD Baby. But I have a case right now where I have to complete the metadata without the songs being released in that platform. So what would be the good way, or an organization for independent artists or independent writers to get credible or valid ISRC?
Well, I mean, CD Baby is a pretty good, reputable organization. So,
if the songs are not if it is requested not to be uploaded in digital platform, and we have to get it on our own, the ISRC.
So the
is there
question
any
is
organization that we can get it?
So the question is, how do I get an ISRC if I'm not going through CD Baby, for example?
Yeah. But the good ones, because I don't want to get fake.
I can actually answer that. Okay, there you can just use Google. Go on google.com and look for ISRC codes. If you want to get in touch with me, you have my information. I'll send you a couple of links. Sorry, I'm sorry to jump in, but that's how you do it. If you don't want to use CD Babies, there's services, they cost some money, but they'll do it for you.
I'm Clarence from Bandwagon. So I'd like to ask, further downstream, do companies like Shazam, SoundHound, even ACR Cloud, do they all depend on a common database? And the reason is because my company, we are developing a technology, a device that listens in public spaces for what's being played. So right now we are leveraging on ACR Cloud, which I know Paitu, NBA, they use that. But would that be a good system that you recommend? And do they all share a common database for the info?
No, actually, they compete on their reference databases. So when you have the music recognition technology companies or YouTube's Content ID or what have you, the whole point of what they're trying to do is to be better than the other guys at identifying music. So that's why they do not share the same database.
So which would you recommend?
I'm not going to start advertising anyone here.
I think Grace would be the recommendation.
Well, no, I think the point that I would make is that you've got to distinguish between recognition, which is recognizing what the recording is, and then the data that surrounds that recording. So the recording's metadata, the song metadata, and everything else. So I think, once you recognize it, then if that message, if you like, drops into, for example, the ICE database, and they can make that connection, then you're good. So I personally don't think that on the recognition side we should be setting up other databases, which I guess is your point, right? Any other questions? Because I think we're about to... we got to go. We got to go. So we could talk for hours, but thanks to my panel. Fantastic. Sami, Caroline, Jacqui, Kenney. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.